We are here in the studio, hopping on for a quick impromptu live here to talk about solar.
Yes.
We've had a ruling come down from the courts that is very exciting for Maine people, less exciting for big out-of-state solar companies who are looking to grift on Maine people. We'll get to that. I'm here with Nick Murray. Nick, you want to introduce yourself to the folks?
Hey y'all, it's Nick Murray. I'm a Policy and Comms Director here at Lead Maine, working with Laurel to get all these issues out there and make it as accessible as possible for folks.
So today we're going to talk about the latest development on solar here in Maine with this court ruling. But first we got to back up, rewind, and talk about 2019 a little bit.
Right.
And the solar policy that was passed way back when. So back in 2019, the legislature, unfortunately, a bipartisan bill was passed that mandated, that said that CMP and Versant had to buy the solar energy that was produced by community solar fields. That's these solar fields you see in gray near the Turnpike, Augusta. We saw them driving up to Washington County recently. You see them all over the state. Well, that policy mandating that CMP and Versant buy the solar energy produced at far more than it costs to produce it made this solar gold rush. And out-of-state companies zoomed into Maine to put up these fields and make bank on the backs of Maine people.
Of course, it's boosted by the administration's goal of trying to get to a full renewable grid by 2040.
Selectively renewable.
Right, exactly. Certain types of renewable to the way they count it by 2040. So that means the administration's pushing this stuff. They have the subsidies behind it. And so we saw this explosion of these solar fields. We're talking about the massive multi-acre solar fields that some farmers are getting more money for a solar field than it is to plow their field and actually plant crops. It's crazy.
It is crazy, and it's costing Maine people a ton of money. How much over 20 years, Nick, is it costing Maine people?
Initially, they said it was supposed to cost $4.4 billion, and that's the stranded cost. That's the difference from what the utilities are mandated to spend versus what those solar panels are going to produce. And so that's got to be borne by the ratepayers, us, through CMP and Versant. So the stranded costs were supposed to be $4.4 billion over 20 years because these solar contracts for the developers were 20-year contracts initially.
So that's a lot of money. So you divide, $4.4 billion by 20 years. That is then put on your bill. That's on your CMP or Versant bill. So we're seeing that charge every single month, that $4.4 billion split up. However, finally, last year, the legislature finally passed a bill, finally, and that's at the root of this court case here, to amend that law and say, okay, we're not going to have any new contracts, and we're going to end this gold rush here. So now Maine ratepayers are going to be on the hook for a grand total of, instead of $4.4 billion, now we're only going to be on the hook for $3.3 billion. Big improvement, right?
That's somewhat of an improvement. Yeah, we'll take it, I guess. I don't know how much that means for everybody's bill. We're going from $275 a year probably down to $250 or $240 a year or something like that. So
exactly. And keep in mind, it didn't cancel any of the existing contracts that were signed but not built yet. So there are still solar fields being constructed around Maine that will be increasing our bill still. So your bill's not finished going up because of these stranded costs.
Right. A lot of those 20-year contracts are still in place. So what the bill did last year was to put a pause on any new contracts. So we saw the queue of the new solar farms that were yet to be built.
Me.
Yep, they're all there. They see the gold rush. They're lined up, and then this bill comes down middle of last year, and all of that's paused. So that put a damper. It sounds like about 89% to 90% of these planned solar fields are now paused.
Yeah.
So that's going to help ratepayers, but it's not the end of the story.
So that's going to help Maine ratepayers. So that's great news. Not as good as it could be because it doesn't save us all that much money, but every little bit helps, right? We're still on the hook for 75% of that $4.4 billion. But here's where we get to the court case. So these out-of-state solar companies, these developers who are making bank on you, the Maine ratepayer, they said, well, that's not fair. We want our money. And frankly, we don't really care about Mainers and their costs. We care about our contracts. And so they sued. They said it is unconstitutional They said it is unconstitutional that they
called it a takings.
changed this. A taking.
They said the government was unconstitutionally taking from them because they had this sweetheart deal that
hang
now
on.
the state.
I gotta say, like,
Yeah.
I think the bill that passed in the first place that said Mainers have to pay $4.4 billion, that's the part, that's the taking of
Right.
Maine people's money.
It's they don't get to make as much money off our backs anymore.
Right.
It's not quite a taking. The judge agreed.
And so the judge said, actually, we don't agree with you. We don't think your lawsuit has merit. And so they didn't grant them a preliminary injunction, meaning this law may carry forward. And the full court case will have to unfold, but they don't get to have an immediate stop to it, which is what these companies wanted.
Right. This is the judge saying, looked at your case, you don't have a
Yeah.
great shot.
Yes.
Early on, I can say it's not looking great for you guys. This is what the preliminary
100%.
injunction.
Which is as it should. Look,
Absolutely.
if you are a solar company and you say, hey, look, there's this amazing, amazing incentive in Maine. We're going to go rake in all the dough that we can. We don't really care about the ratepayers and how they're going to suffer under the weight of this, but we see that we can increase our bottom line. Yeah, maybe the lawmakers will change it at some point. That's a risk that business takes on. That's not a risk that then Mainers should have to pay for. And so these solar companies, that's the risk you take in business. But the problem is that these companies did come in. They didn't have any risk. They knew that ratepayers would be required to pay this. And so unlike, a usual business structure, they just could come in and take advantage.
Yep, in a state with the bottom 3 states in the union on solar energy. You look at Florida as the sunniest state in the country. Maine is about the 47th sunniest state. So we're looking at a way less actual potential solar energy to get from these solar panels. But because of the sweetheart deal, the subsidies, these companies came running in. And so you see how absurd this all is to be pushing solar energy in a state with one of the lowest numbers of amounts of sun energy in the whole country. And so, right, these companies were never coming here.
Proposition for them, though.
Exactly. They were never coming here with that in mind. They came here with the foundation of the subsidies and that they could do this on the backs of ratepayers. And now their gravy train is ending. So they had to file suit. I mean, what else did they have? This is their last line of effort to try to help themselves.
But what I think about here is the fact that this is not even that big of a hit, right? So these solar companies are still getting 3/4 of the money from Maine ratepayers. Maine ratepayers are still on the hook for 75% of these solar subsidies. So instead of being out $4.4 billion, we're going to be out $3.3 billion or so, 3.2, 3.3. Honestly, the bottom line is we should not be subsidizing solar. What I have pushed for years and still push for is that we should completely repeal these community solar, these solar subsidies entirely.
Yep, net energy billing, which allows the whole
It should be gone.
mismatch to occur in the first place.
Yes.
It's got to go. We need a market in energy.
100%. If we are going to have solar in Maine, it should be because the industry can stand on its own 2 legs.
Right.
And as you point out, it can't. Because Maine is not Florida and it's not California. And so if solar had to stand on its own 2 legs, it could not. And that's why these companies are suing, because they know that they're going to be out money if they are ever forced to stand on their own 2 legs. They cannot do it. It doesn't work.
And this is why we're here. So, the legislature did some good work last year, and I totally agree it was not enough. But to have both parties come together and say, this is bleeding ratepayers, we got to do something to stop it. And so they put a little stopper in the dam, but it's still flowing. Like you say, $3.2 billion over 16 years. That's still hitting everyone's monthly power bill.
Yeah.
How do we get out from under that? I don't know. I think you just have to go and you have to repeal everything. You have to repeal all the net energy billing. You have to repeal all the goals and stuff. And
the lawsuits flow then.
Right.
Companies saying, but wait, we signed on to this gravy train. Why? How can you stop it? Well, we can stop it because it's the right thing to do for Mainers and for their energy costs. Nick, would you mind peeking and seeing if we have questions that have come in the comments? And I'll tell this story again of last session. I was sitting in the chamber. minding my own business, doing some work, and a fellow legislator across the aisle had a constituent in there visiting. And I just remember overhearing their conversation. This constituent asked a question about the cost of our energy policy. And I remember this other legislator saying, you know, we really can't take that into consideration. We really can't take that into account because the priority has to be that we have to achieve this energy goal of being 100% renewable. This green energy agenda is the priority, not affordable energy for Mainers. And so we need to, yes, repeal the solar subsidies. We need to repeal the 2040 energy goal of being 90 to 100% renewable energy, especially when lawmakers have their thumb on the scale in the first place with capping hydro and prioritizing certain kinds of green energy while putting the kibosh on others.
Exactly. And just in the comments, Caitlin, it's a complicated issue. And that's exactly it. It's because you have all these different layers of policy, of the administration's goals, of subsidies, of the economic policy in this. It's all a big mess that just pushes folks towards this sort of these energy generation sources that just don't work as well. So we're forced to use the ones that actually work, and now we're told we have to rely on the things that are about, what, 7-8% of our total mix, and that's supposed to lower costs by getting rid of the things that to support the costs.
Is it so complicated, though?
Well, there's a lot of different overlapping policies, but you're right. If we can boil it down,
get government out of the mix.
Exactly. Government is trying to control our lives, and it's not working. It's not going well, and our power bills are relating it.
You know, every piece of this that we talk about comes back to the same thing, that if government stepped out of the way, let the free market work, and Mainers have energy choice and ensure that we have a mix of sources, then that answers the question, and that provides energy at a lower cost without demanding that we rely on one or the other, but instead allowing the free market to determine. Any other questions in the comments?
There's no other questions. I'm noticing that apparently the town of Jackman passed an ordinance that nobody can set up a solar farm in Jackman. So
great.
That's great to hear.
Well, good to hear. There are
probably
towns
too many
that
trees anyway there, but I don't know.
They have to clear cut.
Yeah.
There are towns that have taken common sense measures. There are towns where folks have stepped up and said, no, green comes to mind. I think I will link in the comments. I think that's one of the ones, but I'll link an article where a town did stand up and say no, had a huge outpouring of folks coming to the town council and saying, we don't want this. But it is citizens stepping forward to say no that is preventing some of these solar fields from going in. And thankfully, now that the gravy train has ended, we will see less of that. But thank you guys for tuning in. We'll keep an eye on the comments and answer if there are any other questions that come in that we haven't answered in this live itself. Thanks for tuning in, and we're glad to provide this update. We'll throw the article in the comments, and we will talk to you guys again soon. Thanks so much for tuning in.